If Trey Murphy makes the leap, the Pelicans' ceiling significantly changes. I'll tell you what he needs to do in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans in NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Tuesday, and we are going to look at Trey Murphy and what making a leap would be. And it's probably not what you would expect. So we're going to dive into the numbers of how he can be Kevin Durant-like. It's not going to be KD, but Kevin Durant-like. And why that's a significant game changer. There we go. Jake changer, whatever I was going to say there. Changer for the Pelicans. But then the knock-on effect on Zion Williamson, I find, could be kind of interesting. So let's get into it in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. as well. The same place you watch your Pelicans play, which is still pretty cool to me. So let's get into this one. Trey Murphy III making a leap. Look, he's already a very good player. A very good player. We know this. We've seen what he can do, for this team. It looks like he's going to be ready to start the year after dealing with that shoulder injury that ended his season very early on. But last year in 53 games, 51 starts, 21.2 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 3.5 assists. He shot 36% from three on 8.3 attempts per game. Now, if I say Trey Murphy is taking a leap, we talked about this in the show yesterday when it comes to awards. Like, I don't expect him to win most improved player just because the numbers are already really, really good for him. It would take like a significant 30 point per game, to that number for him to try and win or potentially win most improved player. I think that's kind of where you're looking at it for him. But the numbers are already very, very good. Could there be a 40%? Shooting from three, sure. But truthfully, that wouldn't change all of that much for him. That would add 1 or 2 points per game on the high end. So it's not like that's going to be the big difference in terms of game changing for him. The jump for Trey Murphy is him looking more like Kevin Durant. And look, he's not going to be Kevin Durant. Let's be very clear on this, right? There's only one Kevin Durant, and that guy is very special. But Trey Murphy's already an elite shooter. He's long. He can defend a little bit. Perfect floor spacer next to Zion Williamson. But if he wants to become a borderline all-star, the next step is two things. And they both are with the word creation. Self-creation and creation for teammates. For the most part, teams kind of know how to guard Trey Murphy, I think, here. This is someone who is an excellent spot-up shooter. You run him off the line. He's added a ton to his bag to be able to score in the mid-range or just get to you at the rim, something he didn't have earlier on. But if you force him to dribble into traffic, he tends to reset the offense a little bit. So adding more of just a better handle, more moves into his bag, all of that, that kind of changes things, right? If he can drive, draw help, and make the right kick-out pass, the floor opens for everybody else, right? Herb Jones can cut for buckets. Jordan Poole gets cleaner looks. Bigs get a little bit more space like Zion Williamson. So you're looking at kind of a more Kevin Durant-esque game. Right now, what Trey does not do is create off the dribble. He doesn't create for himself. When you get into the isolation numbers, Kevin Durant is about as elite as they come at this, right? Trey Murphy in isolation this past year was not particularly good. 1.3 of his possessions per game were isolation. That comes to about 7% of his offense. And in that, he shot 27.3% on isolation style ball. That comes to about 0.73 points per possession, which puts him in the 19th percentile. It's not great, right? Like those are bad numbers when it comes to isolation. Kevin Durant, and again, we're not comparing him or saying he should be Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is literally an all-time, one of the top 5 scorers in NBA history. Kevin Durant, though, 4.5 possessions of isolation. That's about a 19% frequency. He scores 1.16 points per possession, shoots 55.8% from the field. It's the 93rd percentile last year, right? Can Trey get to the middle of that? Can he get to, closer to 1.9 or 1 point per possession? I think that is key for him here. If he can be more of a self-creation kind of guy, he becomes near impossible to guard, in my opinion. And when you're self-creating like that, you're capable of going out and making plays for others because people are absolutely terrified of you. This is something that Kevin Durant is particularly good at, in my opinion. He drives, he attacks, he can shoot from mid-range. He's literally just deadly anywhere on the court where you just cannot give him any sort of space whatsoever. Kevin Durant averages 4.4 assists for his career, right? But that number has really jumped. His time in Golden State was 5.4. Brooklyn was 5.8. When he's kind of the focal point of the offense like that, it really is a big time game changer for him here and his teammates. So that self-creation for Trey is going to create creation for other teammates, something that the Pelicans have been lacking. Look, this is partially why they traded for Jordan Poole. He's going to have more creation than than someone like CJ McCollum did. And that's something that this team really, really needed to add to the roster. And so if you can kind of turn him into, more of a primary or, in this case, it would be secondary scoring option, that changes the way things are going to go for New Orleans and what they can do offensively and all of that. And we'll talk more about that in the next segment here. It also gives you some injury insurance should Zion go down. If you have Trey Murphy being ready to kind of be the number one guy and not just the spot up shooter, right? Not just someone who's like, okay, my self-creation is I'm going to take a 36-foot three, which look, he makes the work. You'd like him to cut down on him slightly, but that's nitpicking. All of this, just a little bit more self-creation, being able to get off his own shot in a variety of areas with the ball in his hands, while also then creating for others, is going to be really, really good. He has grown tremendously in some of this area. When teams try and run him off the three-point line his first 2 years in the league, even 3 years in the league, it was not particularly great. And then in his third year, you saw him really grow in that area. They ran him off the line. What he would do is just go straight line to the basket to try and dunk on you. There wasn't a ton of dribble moves in his bag to create some space or get a shot off. And if you basically stood in his way, you took away, he didn't have kind of a secondary game plan of what he would do in that kind of situation. It often led to something bad. He grew a ton with that last year. You could see it. So this is really just the next evolution of his game to me. This is the natural thing for him to do. We can talk about shooting a little bit better from three, but again, we're nitpicking there. We can talk about defense. Yeah, that needs to be better for him. The rebounding, he knows all those things, but the kind of game-changing swing skill for him is that self-creation, because that's going to allow him to get his shot off constantly. And we know he's really good at that. And then that's also going to allow him the ability to create more for teammates. He did a good job in terms of assist numbers the past year, but that number can grow even more, I think, and he can start to look more like a number one option. Right now, with the way his shot profile is and how he plays, I wouldn't call him a number one kind of guy on a team. The 3.5 assists per game were good last year, don't get me wrong, but I don't view him as a number one yet. But he can absolutely grow into that and be the man on this team. And that's something that I think should excite a lot of Pelicans fans and hopefully lead to a lot of good things in the future. And if he does that, look, it really does change things for New Orleans in a variety of ways. And I want to look at how it would change their ceiling coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale. Only then you lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. I'm back in the studio, and of course, I'm still dropping things. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever, and prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. So if you're tired of endlessly scrolling to find the best deal, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats for you in the section that you want, and if you're going to a venue you've never been, you get the panoramic seat view, so there is no surprise. So with Game Time, the price you see is the price you pay, no hidden fees. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen today, how'd the QBs do in the Saints' first preseason game? Spencer Rattler started. Tyler Shook was in there as well. Who did better? Ross Jackson's going to break it down over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make him your second listen today. So let's get into, what Trey Murphy's leap kind of means for the ceiling of the team. I saw on The Athletic the other day, they mentioned that the panic meter for the Pelicans was a 9 out of 10, which, okay, that's, I think, a little bit high here. And a little bit of exaggeration, but you're just kind of seeing that, this offseason here. But if Trey can reliably create for himself and others, the Pelicans have one of the more, at least interesting and, dare I say, even dangerous scoring trios in the league, right? Zion Williamson, we know what he can do. Trey Murphy, we've just kind of talked about it. That's on the verge of being like the #1 guy on a team. And then there's Jordan Poole. That's 3 guys that can get you 20 points on any given night. And one of the things for New Orleans is you've dealt with injuries a ton over the years. What are the chances that all 3 of those guys are going to be healthy for the majority of the season? Could happen. Wouldn't say it's particularly good though, right? Like that's kind of the concern here for this franchise. You need to have some kind of injury insurance in a sense, right? So Trey taking that leap means should someone go down, right? Jordan Poole is a healthy player, is a very healthy player. And then he's going to come to New Orleans and, oh boy, is that going to be tested in an extreme fashion, right? I'm nervous for Jordan Poole when it comes to that. So if one of your top guys misses time, you still have multiple ways to attack a defense, and this offense just doesn't become completely stagnant, easy to defend, and that leads to bad things. The everydayers have long heard me say this. Both offense and defense are very interconnected. Good offense can lead to even better defense. Good defense can lead to easy offense. It's not just one way or the other. They are both interconnected. And so having your offense still stay humming and working when there is an injury and not just completely falling apart is a massively important thing. In the past, when Zion went down, and it was kind of CJ McCollum running the offense, the creation for others, even for himself, there wasn't quite great and wasn't something that would totally work. When your point guard in DeJounte Murray goes down, that's not going to help things either, right? So that has created an absolute ton of problems for the Pelicans that Trey taking a leap gives you some of that injury insurance. And then, I think it also changes just kind of the defensive dynamic. We've seen that, head coach Willie Green is weird when it comes to Trey Murphy. But if he takes a big leap on offense, and look, he's already one of the better offensive players, he should be playing regardless. But you have a really interesting kind of two-way wing pairing with Herb Jones and Trey Murphy that can lock down opponents and be an elite scoring group as well. So this isn't just about Trey taking a leap. It's about pushing the whole team a little bit closer to contending status. And in the playoffs, this would be even more important. You need options. You need multiple guys that can create. We've seen this the past couple of years in the NBA playoffs. If defenses just load up on Zion, we've never seen him in the playoffs, right? But defenses can just load up on him, and that's going to be that. We saw this in that series against the Oklahoma City Thunder where the Thunder just kind of shut down Brandon Ingram and everything fell apart at that point in time, right? The team got swept. That's not great. But if Trey's beating you with self-creation. You can't load up on Zion anymore. You need to put a man or two on Trey Murphy. You already have a man on him, but you need to commit some help defenders or just double team him because he's either pulling up from mid-range. You just basically can't give him space, talking about what we talked about in that first segment of today's show. And then all of a sudden, if Poole gets going hot, you kind of have a three-headed monster here that can keep up with the best offensively in the Western Conference. And you add in someone who's a hard off-ball worker like Herb Jones. You add in a center, whether it's Yves Missi or Derek Queen. Queen being a little bit more of a unique kind of guy, but Missi being hopefully a lob threat at that point in time. That really works. And that doesn't necessarily muck up your spacing, I don't think. So this is about something that, puts the Pelicans in position to be an elite team in the postseason too. If your best guy is a spot up guy, that's not going to quite work, right? You need others to create for him. But if Zion can't get the ball out or keeps turning it over because of double and triple teams to him, and he's not really creating for others so much as just passing and being a connector, and there's a very big difference between being a connector and being a creator. There's tons of connectors in the NBA. If any of the Lonzo Ball fans still really listen to the show here, Lonzo Ball was more of a connector than a creator for New Orleans. Really good at passing on the perimeter. It's great. That's fine. You keep the ball moving. The ball needs to pop a little bit, but you also need to break down a defense, draw two to the ball, and that's not something that Lonzo Ball was doing for the team. Is Trey Murphy drawing two to the team, right? To the ball right now? Depends. Certain situations, yes, but what if he was doing that a little bit more consistently, a little bit more reliably? How does that change things for New Orleans? And I think that's a big thing. Being able to be an isolation scorer, not that you want to do that regularly, right? And to only do that, but to have that in your bag in a way that Trey does not have that now. When you get him the ball, they're just like, we got to play on him. We're not worried about him blowing by us necessarily. Let's crowd his space and see if that creates issues. And good with his size, it's 6'9", 6'10", whatever it might be. You can kind of see the same like physical mold of Kevin Durant there, even though Durant has a longer wingspan, is a little bit taller. But Trey, who looked like he grew in the past year or two, right, kind of fits that mold a little bit. He should be able to get that mid-range shot off. He should be able to get that three-point shot off even when space is crowded. And while shooting a mid-ranger, especially in rhythm, is different than the different kind of mechanics, different form and things like that from a spot up catch and shoot three, if he can work on all of that, we've seen the growth in that kind of in-between game that he has. That really, really changes things for New Orleans and makes Trey even more of a threat in crunch time situations. And the Pelicans have had trouble with that because they're very easy to load up on their one offensive creator and shut the whole thing down. How bad have they looked at times in the fourth quarter games the past 2 years, right? Like that's one of the biggest things they need to improve, and an easy way to maybe add 5 wins to a team by just being better in clutch crunch situations. But this also then has another really interesting knock-on effect to me when it comes to Zion Williamson. So let's talk about how this changes the Zion question that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no off season. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And don't forget, you can watch Locked On Pelicans on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. Same place you watch the Pelicans play. So let's talk about how this kind of has a knock-on effect on Zion Williamson that I find kind of interesting. Look, I think a lot of y'all should have realized by now, I'm kind of a little bit off, not even a little bit, but like been very off the Zion Williamson train over the past couple months that, look, you need that availability. And while Zion can be a franchise guy, when he's not playing and not necessarily doing all the right things, it makes me nervous about building around that, particularly as they enter a new era where you just got to get this right. It's kind of as simple as that. And that just hasn't been the thing. You got to be competitive next year. And if Zion doesn't play, that's going to hurt you, even if you get some insurance in Trey Murphy. So if Trey Murphy becomes a guy that can put up 25 points per game, something along those lines, who can run the offense in crunch time, do you need to count on Zion Williamson in the same way, right? Look, Zion is the highest ceiling player on this team. You could argue he's the best player on the team. But if Trey's leap gives you similar offensive production with fewer availability concerns, and Trey has some around him, you suddenly kind of have just more options available and more paths to you. The past couple weeks, the everydayers have heard this. I've been talking about the Pelicans can choose the path that they want to go down, and they haven't chosen it yet. They still have time to figure out what that path is. Trey taking a leap kind of opens up, or at least pushes you towards a specific path. And I think that's what's kind of interesting here. Does that make it easier to pivot away from Zion Williamson without going through a rebuild? We've kind of focused on two paths, right, that diverge at one point. One of them is be competitive and kind of go all in on being competitive. The other one is pivot away if you're realizing you're not good, trade away the pieces you need to trade away. Trey Murphy is not one of those that you would trade away. And kind of go through a soft rebuild to try and turn that around as quick as possible, but it might be a rough year or two. But if Trey blossoms into a dude that you look at and go, oh, he's number one, and Trey can absolutely do that, that gives you a third path of, okay, we'll just move on from Zion and we'll keep being competitive and we won't hopefully miss much of a beat here. You know, if Trey can turn into that self-creation kind of guy, it does all of that. You can trade Zion for more shooting or defensive depth. Or here's the even bigger thing. The books still aren't great for New Orleans going forward necessarily. You need to figure out how you're going to resolve that. You know, you're going to run into this problem in a year where Jordan Poole's under contract for a year after this coming one, and you're going to be in a similar situation they've been the past 2 years where they're trying to skirt the luxury tax. Because look, let's just assume that this team isn't going to pay the luxury tax for the time being. But if Trey kind of turns into that star, look, you can just waive Zion Williamson if he misses time. And all of a sudden it fixes your books. It's a little bit of a get out of jail free card. Not quite the same that the Saints had with Derek Carr's retirement, but not that either. And so that changes kind of what you could do with Zion Williamson here. The other thing, though, that I think is also interesting, this ties into the Zion question, right? This one involves keeping Zion Williamson. You know, Trey and Zion can easily thrive together. So that kind of then makes Jordan Poole the more expendable guy. And I don't know if Jordan Poole's a long-term piece here for this team. So it gives you options with Jordan Poole versus Zion Williamson. But if Trey's self-creation can take pressure off Zion Williamson, does that keep him a little bit fresher, a little bit healthier? Does that mean you can run Zion on a slight minutes restriction? You know, maybe it's just 32 minutes per game versus 36. Does that help him stay healthy? Right? That, you know, Trey taking kind of a leap puts the Pelicans kind of back in control, and rather than being dependent on Zion Williamson. That's pretty appealing to me. Also, Trey's just a super likable guy that is so easy to root for that I think if he became your number one guy, the fan base would get behind that, you know, so easily, I think. But in the NBA, having flexibility, especially in the second apron era where you need to be able to pivot kind of at a moment's notice in your team building approach, is something that is unbelievably valuable. And I think that's something that the Pelicans could find if Trey's development continues as we hope to kind of see it with this sort of thing. So Trey making this leap, it's not just like a nice to have kind of situation for New Orleans. It's potentially franchise altering in a very positive way, whether that's elevating the team's ceiling to giving this new front office some roster flexibility that they don't quite have right now. And it's the type of thing that really could define the Pelicans' upcoming season, of it being like the year of Trey Murphy III. So that's kind of what you want to see him grow. We can talk about the defense. We can talk about the rebounding. The biggest thing is self-creation and his handle. If the passing gets a little bit better, if he feels good in that kind of in-between game of between the three-point line and dunking on folks, and he can dunk on folks. He feels he was very robbed, by the way, from the dunk contest here. But being an elite shooter like that, being able to kind of just be Kevin Durant-like or Kevin Durant-like. I don't want to put him, he wouldn't want to be compared to Kevin Durant right now because that would be unfair, and that's putting unfair expectations on him. But if you can find some of that kind of isolation scoring and creating for others, doesn't need to be top 5 best of all time, but can you improve from the 19th percentile to getting closer to, say, above 50%? That's the type of thing that does become franchise altering for this team and really unlocks more paths, thus more flexibility than the 2 paths that we've kind of been talking about right now, where the Pelicans have a slight 2 timelines approach that kind of prevents you from doing one or the other. So eventually they're going to need to choose and get off of 2 timelines and on to 1. We don't know what that is. But what if it's Trey Murphy takes a leap and you can still be competitive while also kind of fixing the future too? That's kind of the best of both worlds here. That's how you do that 2 timelines approach, but it's going to take a leap, a little bit of a leap from Trey Murphy III to be able to do that. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow, breaking down more about this Pelicans team. I was doing a lot of brainstorming today. I had a long car ride and came up with a ton of topics here. I'm excited about some of these that we're going to get into with everything. So make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. Follow along on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network as well. And comment down below on YouTube. Become an everydayer as well. And that's going to do it for this show. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. See y'all next time.